Hey, this is Curtis Millsap with Millsap Farm. Today on our Springfield Community Gardens sponsored farm walk, we're going to dig into how do we plan for a season of success. So we're taking all the information and data that we've collected over the summer and we're sitting down and thinking that through and helping us shape our plan for the future and so that we are setting ourselves up for the best possible outcome. I hope you find a lot of value in this video. 14 years ago, and have been building the farm since then. So when we bought the place, all that was here was the big house and this big greenhouse, and the barn. So all the covered structures, which is another, let's see, this is a 6,000 square foot greenhouse, and we've got now a total of about 30,000 square feet of greenhouses. So we've multiplied that quite a bit. And we've added on to the house, and we've added on to our family, and we've added on to our crew. This year we had, at the peak of the season, I think we had somewhere between 18 and 20 people on payroll. And all that is supporting about 2.5 acres of vegetable growing. So it's it's a very labor-intensive effort. And I will, let me give you the caveat before I say this next bit. I will talk freely about money because I think it's really important that farmers learn to do that, because frankly farmers have not talked about money for so long that now most farmers aren't making a living doing what they're doing. So if I talk about money, I hope you won't be offended. I know it's one of those things you're not supposed to talk about: sex, religion, and money. I promise not to bring up the other two. Yeah, that's probably a fair promise. But I will talk about money today. So yeah, overall our farm last year brought in about, on vegetables, about $250,000 worth of vegetables off of 2.5 acres. No, that's not quite fair. There's actually about 50,000 of that's resale. So 200,000 off 2.5 acres, which is a pretty high per acre number. It's definitely in the upper range. But our expenditures are also, similarly outrageous. So no one's getting rich here, but we are employing a lot of people, and we're producing a ton of really good food, and we're living a good life. I'm very happy with the lifestyle and the quality of life that my family and I get to enjoy. That was the big part of the reason anyway that Sarah and I chose farming in the first place. Was we wanted to live with our family in a place where we could work together and do what we wanted together. And then the other value that we have that Sarah and I are really strong about is travel. We both love to travel, and so we take about 6 weeks of vacation a year. And that's also, I think, an important thing to talk about, because it's rare to talk to a farmer who hasn't felt burnt out at some point or another. And that's a sad thing to me, because we are doing really important work, and without farmers we don't have food. It's kind of cliche, but it's very true. And yet, you wouldn't know that by the way that farmers and society have kind of framed the picture, right? And just to pick easy targets, but I went to a farm bureau, farm bureau gathering this summer, and in that audience, well over half the people there were part-time farmers. Well, I mean, that's not really fair to say. Nobody's a part-time farmer. They were fully engaged in farming, but they also had a full-time job off the farm. And I don't view that as a long-term sustainable solution. Long-term people have got to be able to make a living doing the thing that they both are called to do and are passionate about, and that takes their time. Because I can't imagine working a full-time job and then coming home and trying to do what I do. It just seems dangerous for me and for my all sorts of things. So that said, what we're going to talk about today is part of how do we plan for success. Because as a friend of mine who's former military, he's got all sorts of sayings, but one of his favorites is, a failure to plan is a plan to fail. And he's right. I've seen me do it. So it's important for us to really end the season with a planning process that then leads us into the next season, rip-roaring, ready to go, that doesn't mean, and I'll say this probably many times, but the plan is a map. The thing I love about maps is when you've left it. It's not that you're necessarily going to stay on the trail that you set out or any of that, but at least it gives you some perspective, right? Whereas if you're without a map, you have no idea. You have no idea where you might be and whether you're still on the track or not, and all that's problematic. So I like to talk about it that way, but this is what we'll do. I've got 6 packets. Drew, if you want to distribute these other 4, I think you can get one, and you guys can pack it. And these are not identical packets. What I did was I printed out some pages from from the materials that we use, and so I'm gonna. Oh darn it! I missed one. Let's see, just a moment.
Are they the same thing?
He said they're all kind of different.
Call Sarah Millsap. The packets are what they are is they're the same. They're a set of the same. It's hard to describe. Oh, my wife. I forgot to print one of them. I just remembered, so I'll have her print it off and bring it. Somebody will print it and bring it off. But yeah, so the first couple pages are the spreadsheet that the big planning spreadsheet. Hi. Hey, I wrote that document on the computer and then forgot to print it off. Would you print me, let's say 8 copies, maybe 9 copies of that, of the document that's open in Google Drive on my computer? No, it should say, it's a document. I got my outline. Okay, so but as we talk about planning, there's a set of documents we use, and you've got sort of a representation of those. Okay, so each of these is somewhere between 10 and 15 pages long, but you've got a page of it or 2 pages of it. So I hope that will help. The first one that you've got there is what we call our Millsap Farm planting plan, and you have an expanded version. So actually, that first page that you're looking at, the black and white spreadsheet, there is Drew's got it exactly right. So there's a front page, and then there's it continues on. It's bigger than one page will fit, right? But this is the end product, if you will, of our planning process. But it's also the starting point. So we pull this thing out and we look at it. We go, okay, so what worked and what didn't this year, as we look down through here. But a plan needs to have, all the elements that are on this sheet. And that is, what are we growing? How much of it are we going to grow? Where is it going to grow? And the timing. Okay, so in our case, if you look at the two sheets of that spreadsheet, and of course one's a full sheet, one should be a partial, right? So the last column on the partial is harvest, right? And the harvest date cues everything else in. Mm-hmm. So on my spreadsheet, that's the variable, if you will, and everything else adjusts accordingly with the formulas. Now, of course, there's also how many plants we're planting, that sort of thing. But in time, the key number is harvest, we'll come back to that. But there's a reason for that, and that is that's what really matters, right? But everything else then keys off of that. So if it's going to be harvested, then it has to be transplanted this far before that, right? So the tomatoes, for example, we need 70 days on most tomatoes before harvest. We need to transplant 70 days before if we're going to hit that harvest date. And then if we're going to transplant those tomatoes, then we have to say, okay, what's seedling date to maturity? So that category STM you see at the top, that's seedling date to maturity. That is how long from when we seed it to when we're going to transplant it. What are we going to call a mature transplant? And those are kind of my key numbers in time. So if I know that tomatoes, I want to start harvesting. Give me a date on there, Drew, if you would. What's a harvest day? You don't have tomatoes on there, probably, do you? Because that's pretty far down in the sheet.
I have tomatoes.
You got tomatoes? All right. Yeah. What's a harvest date on tomatoes?
It looks like 30 May.
There you go. Okay. So if we're planting on the 30th of May, if we're harvesting on the 30th of May, then when are we going to transplant? You've got that date there?
15 March.
Right. So there's 2 months, right? Give it a month, 2.5 months, about that 75 days. And then we back that up, and when are we going to actually seed those? Which should be, your category will be date to seed.
Yeah, 9 January.
There you go. So, you see how that works. And everything keys off. Now when we built this spreadsheet, and I say we, so I was gifted this spreadsheet from another CSA farmer, and then I modified it for my purposes, and I've passed it on to many other people, and I'm glad to pass it on to you guys. But what we do there is, you adjust your times as you know you need to. So, for example, if I'm growing Brandywine pink tomatoes, well, those are heirlooms. They're going to take a little longer to get to maturity versus like a early girl, maybe my earliest tomato out of the field. So I'm going to adjust my days on everything accordingly. The seedling days to maturity isn't going to change much, but that between transplant and harvest, there's going to be a difference. The other thing I'm going to do, the other reason I'm going to adjust that is like in those early ones, January 9th to the 15th of March is actually a pretty long time to raise a tomato seedling. So I'm either going to do that, and there's two reasons that is that long. No, let me back up and say, we can transplant a 4-week-old tomato plant into the field and have great success. Nothing wrong with that at all. It'll be a little bitty plug, and it'll take off and go crazy in June, or the end of May. But if I want to transplant it into a cool high tunnel in March, I want a really big, healthy plant to start with. And when I say big, I'm going to do like a 3-inch pot. And the plant itself is going to be this tall, and I want it to have a nice, robust stem and root system. And so to get to that, I need to give myself that extra time. And then also, we run a cool greenhouse. So I'm not heating my greenhouse to 60 degrees. I'm heating it at nighttime temperature like 40 or 45. I do have seedling heat, a heat mat on my seedling table. Hey, buddy, thank you. Would you give Carson one of those and then bring the rest of them around here? Reuben, pass them around, buddy. Oh, they're stapled. Well, we can just yank them off like it's a disposable pad. That's good thinking. It's easier to hang on to them on a bike. Sure. So the point is that we adjust according to the conditions, right? And you always got to think that through. So in the fall, what might normally be a 4 weeks from transplant to harvest ahead of lettuce, we're going to add at least 2 weeks to that if we're planting after the beginning of September. We plant something in December, we may not expect, we may add 6 weeks to harvest to maturity date on that. So we and that's stuff that we've learned with experience and time and talking with other growers and kind of adjust. But the basic principle stays the same. Those are the things you're measuring, right? You're measuring how long between when I seed and when I transplant, and then from when I transplant to when I harvest. And then, of course, if it's a direct seeded crop, you skip that first number and you just have a second number. But thank you, buddy. Good job. Well done. Oh, great. Now I remember what we were going to talk about. Good. All right. We kind of skipped to the bottom there, but that's okay. Because it's a loop, right? That's what's interesting about this whole process is that planning, like all farming, is really a loop in the cycle of a year, right? We plan, we execute, we measure, we take that data, and we plan again. If we're gonna do it well, that's our loop. So, looking at this sheet, other things you'll notice on here, we have some other numbers. The other number we enter is row feet. And that's kind of an arbitrary choice. We could have done the number of plants. We could have done the bed space. That's just how it was handed to me, and so we've kept with that format. But the row feet spaces out like this. So if we want, for example, let's see. You guys have got all different things, but you can kind of look through that and understand how it works. But you have row feet, and then you divide that by your spacing. So your spacing could be 1 inch, it could be 12 inches. That is the unit in the spacing column, and then that translates into how many plants do you need, or how many seeds do you need if it's direct seeded, right? And then you divide that up by your rows. Your row feet is divided by rows, and that tells us how many 100-foot long, 3-foot wide beds we're going to use. Does that make sense of what you're looking at? Okay. And as I said, I am so glad to share this. This is one of the things that I love to send out to people. So If it looks useful to you, then just send me an email and I'll send you a link to it. It's a Google Doc or Google Sheet, so it's pretty easy to share. But all this gets translated into, or gets collected, and you can tell it's big. I think this year, well, let's see, this is the full greenhouse version of this plan, and it's on 2 pages, 2 sides, and it's 10-ish pages, so it's 20 plus pages long. There's a lot of entries in this spreadsheet, and part of that's because there's a lot of things we're growing, but part of it's because each succession gets its own entry as well, right? So if you're planting arugula, in our case, I think it's 12 times through maybe it's more than that, through the season, then each of those gets its line and date and spacing and all that. And so once you add all that together, then you have 400 plus entries on a spreadsheet. So it adds up. Anything else to mention on this? Let's see. No, we'll come back to this, but let's flip a page and what I just realized I didn't label these very well. You may have an interesting time interpreting this. So I want you to look for the. Let me see. Here, let me see.
We've got the spreadsheet. He's got the rest.
Okay, so.
The seed inventory.
Okay, so this was the next one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't want you to look at the one, the seed inventory. I want you to look at the next one, which is going to be farmers market numbers. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I believe that's what that is. Let's just make sure. Yeah. Oh, no, it's not either. That's CSA. Okay, good.
CSA. And
So
this
go to
is,
the last one is farmers market, the one that has dollar numbers on there.
It ends with dollars. Not
There you go.
percentage.
The one that ends with dollars. That's our farmers market numbers. Everybody find that okay? It should be, what was it, sheet 4 maybe? Is that what it was in the packet? Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're doing with farmers market numbers, is anybody else hot? We need to open, Drew, you want to open that door behind you? Might as well let some air in, right? What a great problem to have on a 35-degree day. Okay. So our farmers market numbers, we're looking for a couple things when we look at that. We're looking at our total sales, our sales percentages for the week, and notes about weather, other notable things. I didn't bring my. Yep. I should have done that. Anyway, what we have is we have a one-sheet thing that goes to market with us, and it just says what are we taking to market, what are we charging for it, how many of them are we bringing. Okay, it's pretty simple. But the important thing is, at the end of the week, at the end of the market, we count what we've still got. When we took 100 heads of lettuce, we sold 70. Then when we go in later to do that inventory, the planning process, then we can say, oh, when we're selling lettuce, we're selling 70% of our lettuce. Hey, you here for the planning process?
Yes.
All right, excellent. You're in the right place.
Thank you.
So what we're doing when we look at those farmers market numbers is let's see. I got a couple of. This isn't all. Unfortunately, I underestimated our need for
And here's the one that Ruben was.
Oh, and
handing
there's an
out.
extra
You can-
for Ruben.
Yeah.
There we go. All right. Good deal. Here's the outline of what we're talking about. Okay. Yeah, you bet. So when we look at farmers market numbers, here's the things I'm looking for. I want to know where were there missed opportunities and where was there an oversupply. So if you look at your spreadsheet with the farmers market numbers on it, what you'll see is how many did we take and how many did we bring home. Now we haven't done, on this particular version, we didn't have the percentage entered on there, right? But you can see, let's see if I can interpret for you because there's a column thing there. Oh. Oh, this is. No, it's not yours. It's that. I'm sorry. You're right. Yeah, you're right. I didn't. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Huh. That's interesting. Okay. Well, we have that data. That's the answer. And sorry. Yeah, I didn't make it onto your sheet. What you do have on your sheet is total sales numbers, right? and you have them by date. And that's part of what we're looking at. But then there is actually a category where we're looking at percentage sold. Okay, I'm sorry that didn't make it on those sheets. I'm not sure why not. But if we take 100 heads of lettuce and we only sell 70, we go, that was probably as much lettuce as we need to grow in that week of the year. Things we've learned by doing this process is that for years we sold 100% of the lettuce we brought on Mother's Day and Memorial Day. Okay, well that's interesting information to know, right? Yeah, so that's it. Also radishes, which is crazy. We sold 200 bundles of radishes last year at a farmer's market, the farmer's market before Mother's Day. I don't know why people think their mothers want to eat radishes, but I'm like, that's okay. If that's how they roll, let's give them radishes. And so that's the sort of thing you learn, right, by looking at this with, and I hesitate to use the term fine-tooth comb, but it kind of is. It's looking at enough detail to be able to pick up the patterns and say, these are the times when we can say we need to be producing more of this. So another thing we've learned through that was that arugula, for example, is one of those kind of sleeper crops that we can't grow enough of on certain dates. And then other times nobody wants it at all, right? And so what we learned was in the summertime, when there's a lack of greens, the interest in arugula goes up. And in the springtime, when they're swimming in greens, arugula is not going to be people's first choice. So by doing that, what we've been able to do then is translate that into the plan a little bit and say, okay, that helps us shape then what we should be growing week to week. And then let's skip down to CSA. Now this is the one that has percentages on it. So if you have a sheet there, the last column is percentages. And one more thing I'll mention about the farmer's market. One of the other things you got to watch is those notes about weather, right? So crummy weather just pushes market numbers down. So it is important if you have a weird blip in your sales numbers to go, oh, was that? Oh yeah, was the day they had thunderstorms. Nobody came to the market, or it snowed on the first week of April, and so now it's not that normally April markets are going to be like this. It's just this particular one. But that's why we take notes, or there's a special event, or there's not a whatever it is. But we try and take enough notes to be useful of anything kind of exceptional. So CSA numbers, the last column in that is the percentage, and then you've got the item, you've got the week. Is that right? What's that second? Delivery label. Okay, so the first one is your item, and then you've got, oh yes, don't worry about the second column. The third column is how many did we offer, and the fourth column is how many actually sold. So on the date over here, that's right. So column 1, what is it? Column 2, skip it. Column 3 is how many did we offer. Column 4 is how many were actually taken. Then there's the unit. And then if you look off to the right there's the date and the percentage that represents. So what does this mean for us? Well, we do a sort of choose your own adventure version of CSA with a computer program, and what that allows people to do is to select what goes in their share. Now there's a couple things to know about that. One is not everybody does that. A bunch of people don't ever do any selection in their share. They just take what comes. But even those people, if they've taken step 1, which is to go in and set their preferences, are getting a preferred share. They're getting the list. They're getting the things they would prefer to have, and generally. And so what that's done is that's actually changed our CSA quite a bit from when we weren't doing it. Because when we weren't doing that, we'd go, well, we got 50 pounds of tomatoes this week. All 50 of our members are getting a pound of tomatoes. And that was the way it worked. We got 100 pounds of tomatoes. Everybody's getting 2 pounds of tomatoes this week. Great. And we were always very committed to the value version of that. So if somebody bought a $20 share, they weren't getting more than maybe $21 worth of produce, because one of the major complaints about CSAs is it gave me too much food. You don't want to do that to people. So we want to make sure that we're disciplined about that. And frankly, too, it doesn't take much of that to be giving your product away. Profit margin on a really tight, lean farm is about 50%. So if you take 10% off of your product, you just took 20% off of your profit. My profit margin is not 50%. It's significantly less than that, somewhere around 25%. So if I take 10% off, I just gave up half of my profit. That's not cool, right? I mean, it doesn't sound like much. You say 10% off, well, it's a big deal. You just gave up half the money you were actually making. So we want to be careful with that. So I don't do much discounting, and on CSA we're very disciplined about making sure that when people buy a $30 box, they're getting, no more than like $31, $32 worth of produce, and then no less, of course, than like $29.50 or somewhere in there too. So, but all that to say, that as we changed our system to this choice system, a lot of things shifted. One of the things we noticed, for example, that we learned by looking at this document, was that in the middle of the summer, people were not wanting nearly as many tomatoes as we were growing. Now, that might not surprise you because you've gardened and grown and you've seen the overwhelming tidal wave of tomatoes that can hit us in July, right? But still, we thought that other people were enjoying it. I mean, we enjoy it. We do all, we freeze, we eat lots of tomato sandwiches. Like, we can go through a lot of tomatoes in my family. People were not enjoying that as much as we thought they were, and so when they had choice, they were leaving that behind and instead choosing carrots or head lettuce or radishes. And so that was interesting information because for me, I'd much rather grow $2.50 worth of radishes than $2.50 worth of tomatoes. $2.50 of tomatoes represents a tremendous amount of labor and effort on our part to get there, especially to ensure that we're there. Like, it's not, just every pound of tomatoes isn't that big a deal, but when you add up that, we have 250 CSA members in the summertime, that's a lot of tomatoes. So to say, oh, well, if we don't need that pound of tomatoes, or we only need to give 1/3 of our members that pound of tomatoes in the first week of August, then that totally changes my growing plan. Now I can shrink my tomato growing by a significant amount and scale up my radish growing a little bit and meet that market demand while not overwhelming my members with something they don't want and not creating extra labor and expense for us. So all that to say, this is how this data works, and I hope that is interesting and exciting to you as it is to me, because to me it was like, oh wow, this is a huge gift, because now I actually can aim my my growing at my market, or the other way of saying it, I like this phrase as well, is it's pull marketing rather than push marketing. It's not just me showing up with 500 heads of lettuce and being like, why won't everybody buy my lettuce? Trying to get, give out coupons for my lettuce so I can sell more lettuce. It's me going, I know that in the peak of July, I can sell 150 heads of lettuce at market every week because historically I've looked at my numbers and I can see that's about my demand. And it's not that I'm just going to grow 150. I may probably aim for 200 there, but that to me is a pull. That's the market saying, I want this much. We want this much, rather than me going, take it, take it, take it. So that's a healthier place to be as a farm, and certainly as a marketer, because then you're giving the people what they actually want rather than just trying to convince them they want what you have. So that's a big part of how that works. And in the CSA, that data was kind of pretty shocking for us to learn that. Then of course we collect total sales data for the CSA, and then we also do by item. And I didn't have a good way to share that with you. I'm glad to forward you the document that we have that does that, but it's a really complex document. I don't even understand how you would go about printing it. It's a pie graph that when you click on it, these things pop up, and it's cool. I mean, it's like playing a video game, but it is not something you can print out very well. So, but what we learned from that was there are some real sleeper crops in there. So, for example, now this is pretty sad looking right now because we just cut the heck out of it all summer long. But we learned that herbs were a big sleeper crop for us. And when I say sleeper crop, what I guess I mean is something that didn't cost us much to grow. Low effort, low resources, fairly low labor. I mean, herbs are high labor in the sense that you got bundles are kind of a hassle. But at the same time, you can bundle a lot of parsley in a hurry. And at $2.25 a bundle, you can harvest. I mean, if you're worth anything at all as a farm worker, you could easily harvest 100 bundles of parsley in an hour, right? Well, that's $225 an hour in harvesting product, and the benchmark that we aim for is $100. That's blowing it out of the water. That's fantastic, right? you know, and sure, tomatoes will also perform that way on that metric, but tomatoes, we heated the greenhouse, we grew the stinking things for 6 weeks before we ever put them in a greenhouse, and we babied them for 8 weeks in a greenhouse, and then we trellised them and we pruned them, and then we picked them, and half of them were rotten because that's how tomatoes are, and then we got that $250 an hour for harvesting. Parsley, we sprinkled some seed.
Yeah, it was like a weed.
It grows. It is a weed. I'm pretty sure that somewhere somebody's like pulling parsley out of their tomato beds. You know, so that was a big surprise. So on parsley, you know, last year I think we sold about $600 worth of parsley to our CSA members. Well, okay, that's not. We're not gonna, you know, we're not gonna hang the farm on $600 worth of parsley, but
Don't turn it down.
don't turn it down, and realize that that's, you know, if we're going to try and push something out the door, then that would be a great choice. If we have some restaurant, like, for example, and this I haven't hit this, and somebody should, but there's a that Lebanese restaurant here in town. They go through absurd amounts of parsley. I talked to him one day, and he's like, "Yeah, we buy 2 cases."
Seaweed salad,
Yeah, it's basically parsley salad, right? So he's buying 2 or 3 cases a week, I think, of parsley, and his number's not huge. I mean, I think he's only paying like $1.25 a bundle, but even $1.25 a bundle, you could be harvesting $100 and some worth of product an hour, and from something that grows like a weed. So it's kind of one of those things where once you have the numbers in front of you, look at it and you go, wow. So the way I use that number, I use the total number, and then I compare it to how much bed space I had devoted to that. And then I kind of take what we call, it's a very scientific method. It's called wagging, W-A-G. It's wild ass guessing. And that means we're looking at it, we're going, how long does it take us to do this? You know, how long, because I don't keep the kind of records that would help me know how long did it take us to prep this bed, plant or, you know, transplant or seed this parsley, and then harvest the parsley. But I do have, you know, every once in a while I've kind of paid attention to that sort of thing, so I can say, yeah, you know, prepping a bed takes about an hour, and transplanting with the paper pot seeder takes us about 20 minutes, and the seeding in the greenhouse, you know, took us about 10 minutes. So I kind of get these, I can kind of add that up, and I can say, okay, so really, you know, when you look at the bed prep and the transplanting and the seeding, those go away. Those numbers get paid off very quickly. So harvest is your only ongoing cost, and so that's how I get to these things and go, okay, so we need to grow more parsley, or if we can sell it, we need to grow more parsley. So then we turn to the CSA numbers. We look at our total number, $600 worth of parsley. We say, how much of our parsley that we offered did it sold? Well, when we started doing this, 100% of the parsley we offered every week was selling, or high 90s or whatever it was. It was a lot. And we said, well, we should clearly be growing more parsley. If we can sell it, we should be growing more. And that's the sort of stuff that comes out of this planning process, right? Is going, okay, so we just figured out that we're undersupplying a market that we would like to meet, that is profitable, and therefore, now we're doing this in December. We're going to boost our parsley number by, let's say, 50%. Grow 50% more parsley, and that's how that works, right? Then next fall, we're going to look at those numbers again. We're going to say, okay, how much parsley did we sell this year? Well, we sold about 75% of our parsley. All right, that's probably about right. That's probably where you want to stall out, right there, right? Now, the other thing we're going to look at, and you can see this on your CSA percentage sheets, is that changes over time, right? So our early parsley, we're selling a much higher percentage than what we're selling midsummer. And that's not just because there's more demand in the summer and the spring than in the summer. It's actually because we have a bigger supply, because we don't do as much greenhouse parsley as we do field parsley. And that's a reasonable reason. But at the same time, it also, each year we keep adding a little bit more to our greenhouse parsley because we keep selling it. And we keep going, okay, well, we should probably grow a little more of it. So that's how that process works. And that's how the percentage taken offered works together with total sales numbers to steer us as we make these plans. Okay, so I should stop and ask if anybody has questions about any of that. far so good? All right.
I do.
Do we need to walk around a little bit, stretch our legs maybe?
I have a
Yeah.
logistical question about record keeping.
Yeah.
You're going to market, so I mean, I guess you guys you're tallying, that stuff. Where do all these? Is this all spreadsheets? Like, who accesses them and who
The
puts
paper,
this stuff in?
So our market record is a simple paper sheet, and in fact you'll see it. The girls are at market right now, but when they come back, Ruth and Janae went to market this morning. When they come back, it'll be around 2:30 or so. We can look at that sheet, and there's a clipboard. It's a real simple document because the last thing we tried a cash register system for a while, like a square thing, and we all hated it for many reasons. But the biggest one was it felt like you were disconnected from the customer. I mean, one of the great things about farmers market is you're looking them in the eye as you dig the cash out of your pocket and giving them the money, and so. And you know, instead of this, like, I'm doing this thing, well, that's not really what people come to market for. And that's not why we go to market. We like the connection. So that's what pushed us away from that. So we settle on this paper form, which just means there's some data entry to do. So this is the time of year when we do it. It's not usually, it's not a hard time to do it because it's cold and crummy, and you say, oh yeah, I'm glad to go do data entry this morning. It's, 20 degrees outside and sleeting. I'll sit down right here with my cup of tea in front of the computer and do that. And so that's how it gets collated, and then that's on a Google sheet that we can compare year to year. We're not Google sheet wizards. We just kind of flip back and forth and look at things from year to year, or we can copy and paste stuff over to be able to compare similar columns. And then we will do we'll organize it, several different ways. We'll look at percentage sold, and organize it that way, and go, okay, well, here are the, these top 10 things that we're selling 100% of every time we bring. Figs was one of those. We find that by sorting by percentage, right? We go, well, we should consider whether we want to grow a lot more of this. And then the stuff at the bottom, we'll go, oh man, we're only selling like 20% of the, what's a good example? We used to sell, I think of things we don't take as much. Oh, arugula in certain times of the year was one of those. We were just taking a whole lot of arugula that wasn't selling. And, on the plus side, arugula is not a tremendous amount of effort to grow and cut and send out, but it was effort that we did that was not being compensated. And so we did, on our market supply, we shrunk the arugula in certain times of the year. But yeah, we can sort it by that. We can sort it by total sales number. So we say, well, this is, this, even though we're selling like 70% of the parsley, there's a little room for growth there. And if it's a big enough number, then it's worth bumping that up because it's going to make another $200 or $300 a year. That's or $1,000 a year, whatever it is. It's worth trying that out. The CSA numbers, fortunately for us, get generated automatically by Harvey, so that's pretty easy. We just download a big spreadsheet and then we piddle with the spreadsheet until we are looking at what we want to look at. Yeah, I think those are the two. And so a really wise thing that I've heard is only collect as much data as you're going to find useful. Because you can do a lot of data collection that's not, if it doesn't have a pretty specific purpose, it's just busy work. Now, that said, there have been times, I guess, when we've looked back at things that we collected kind of without a real clear idea of exactly what we're going to use it for, that then later did come in handy. But more often than not, that's, we've also got lots of records that we one year we tried to do labor recording, and it was hard. It was really hard because we have such diverse days, and then you've got all this data that gets recorded in non-standardized ways. I mean, you go to market, you've got carrots, radishes, tomatoes. Like it's the categories are pretty straightforward, but then you've got you record data, and you got okay, I spent 35 minutes trellising the tomatoes, and then I went and trellised the cucumbers for 20 minutes, and then I went and seeded some beans, and it's like, wow, what do you do? And then tomorrow's going to be completely different. You've probably got 150 categories of of specific tasks, that's not very useful information. So we've stopped doing that. Which isn't to say that it's not a good idea if you have some real particular purpose, but that's the thing we try and watch now. Is like we need to have a real specific purpose to collect data before we do it.
So you have your map, obviously your crop plan, but then the inevitable deviations. You have a log of what you actually seed, what actually makes it into the ground to that level.
So we don't do the in the ground very well.
Yeah.
That's a missing piece that really should be there. What we have instead, we do have on our greenhouse version of the planning sheet that you've got, which has shrunk quite a bit, right? So we've hidden a lot of the columns of things that we don't need to know when we step up to the planting, to the seeding table. But the thing we do have there is a actual number seeded, and there's also usually these might be lacking it, but usually we try and have a column that says also any extra notes. So when did we seed them, and how many did we seed? Like were there seeds missing, and sometimes that's the case. Sometimes we have, despite our best plans, maybe we get to the seedling table and there's not enough lettuce seeds for that cycle, and now we know, okay, well, the reason we ran out of lettuce in July was because when we seeded that crop in early May, we were short 100 seeds of lettuce, and so that's not really a plan problem, that's an execution problem, and so we do have those kind of notes that we can refer back to as well. I wouldn't say that we do a great job of that, but we do have this with us when we do the December planning process, and that it is useful when we reference it.
Well, there's a lot of things that can happen between number you actually seed and number that goes to market.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot. I'm sure there's a lot of optimization there. Like there's crop loss or just aphids or whatever.
A lot of that turns into anecdotal, which is not the best way to be doing it. So the people I know who do better at this are really avid crop loggers, and so they've always got their pocket notebook. Usually it's a notebook. Some people are using phones, but I find phones are too easy to distract you in other stuff, and then of course they're easy to break and all those sort of things as well. So I think paper is a reasonable way to do that, but then you have to translate that into some format that's going to be usable over time. I have one of the most inspiring guys that I saw talk about this, Alex Pitt from Peregrine Farms out in Virginia. And Alex was like, he's just one of those consummate record keeper farmers. He just was always on it. And he said the way he motivated himself to make that record each night, he would take his notebook out each night and then he would enter that. I think he was doing online, I don't actually remember now whether it was a computer or just a more formal, like categorized format, whatever it was, something that he would be able to use later. That was his glass of wine. He could have a glass of wine after he finished. His self-reward was sit down after dinner, do this, and then you get your glass of wine. And so that was, but I think that points to the fact that like I don't know very many, if any, farmers who got into farming because they love record keeping. It's not really the way we're wired up. So most of us find this to be sort of the less fun part of the job. And yet, the reason we do it at all, because I am the last guy to go keeping records. I'm totally a seat of the pants kind of guy. But the reason we have a vigorous plan and a vigorous collection of data is because if you don't, I think almost certainly you're not going to be profitable. I just think it'd be very, very hard, at least in any sort of diverse crop. Maybe if you're just growing tomatoes and you got a real specific market for them, then maybe you can just grow the heck out of the tomatoes, get them to bloom and crop as early as possible, and sell them for as late as possible. And maybe that's a viable market plan. But for anybody who's doing more than a couple crops, it sure seems like it's really important to have enough data collection to do this. So you got to find some way to reward yourself for it. And my reward is travel. I know that there's a very direct link between how well we plan and execute our plan and what I get to do in the wintertime as far as going somewhere and doing something. I love the farming. I love doing what we do. And I love being here. But I also enjoy going and seeing other places. And I know when I do my job well in the summertime, then I have more freedom to go do that in the winter. So that's kind of, everybody's got to find their thing, I think. But that's mine.
Cool.
Get it, more or
Yeah.
less?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's take this show on the road, because it's lovely out there, and it's not really that lovely. It's actually kind of chilly, but I think we will enjoy a quick traipse around the farm, and we can continue talking about this process. Okay, so so let's. I'll give you a brief what's going on out here. So the fig house is currently empty. We're getting ready to renovate that and put in just a quick crop in the center of it, because the figs will take over again probably around the first week of May. But right now they'll be dormant until then. So we're going to plant some. I think the current leading plan for that is head lettuce, and we'll see. That's if we have weather like this all winter, we ought to be planting tomatoes.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. This tunnel has a little bit of Napa cabbage left in it, and some Salanova lettuce that's getting yanked out pretty soon here. We've still got a little bit of field spinach, you can see, but most of these fields are either in the process of being renovated, so like the tarp is helping kill the weeds and decompose everything under it. We'll pull the tarp off in the spring and plant. Or there's 4 beds, I think it's 3, up there right beside the fig house that are seeded into carrots and spinach. And those are our very earliest carrots and spinach. We seed those in November, and they usually come up in January or February, depending on the year. This year, they may be up. I haven't actually checked them in a couple weeks, so it's possible. But usually, spinach will germinate as low as 32 degrees. It just takes like 3 months to do so. And we used to wait until the sort of farmer's almanac sort of cycle. You go, well, it's the 15th of February. It's time to plant the lettuce and the carrots, and that's fine. But if the 15th of February turns out to be like last year, when it was 13 degrees out, or negative 13, and it was a foot of snow, it's kind of hard to plant the lettuce on those conditions. And so instead, we do this, and now, it's planted. It's just waiting for the right conditions to grow. And so when those conditions arrive, whether that's January or March, it'll start growing. And we've kind of taken our variable, the weather variable, out of it, I guess, in the sense that we're not waiting for the soil to be right. I guess what we're going to say. That works pretty well. It works well with spinach and carrots. It has not worked for beets. We tried that several times. The beets just never did well under that system, and I'm not totally clear why, but they would either come up and then die off and be real sparse, or they would if they got a little bit of growth on them and then it got real cold, they would get damaged, and then you get a beet that's like has 6 tops on it instead of 1 top. There's really weird things that would happen, and they wouldn't grow well. So we stopped doing that with beets, but we do it with carrots and spinach. And we usually can harvest those carrots around the 1st of May, sometimes earlier. This year, who knows? So everybody keeps saying, like, karmically we're waiting for February to kick in, right? But I'm not sure that's how it works with weather. It's not like cosmic balance somewhere. So.
Do you cover crop?
Some, yes, I do. You won't see out here. There's no cover crops. Down here, you can see there's some rye. It's all that green that you see is rye, and there's some daikon in there as well, which we actually harvested and sold to a food program out of Oklahoma. Out of the cover crop? Yeah. Cool. We should do more of that. That's nice. Yeah, we sold them 100 pounds of daikon. And she says she's coming back for more in January. And I said, we'll have it. Because I like daikon as a cover where I'm not going to so this is really not a crop area. It's more of a kind of something we're trying to turn eventually into perennial pollinator and beneficial habitat. But we have a Bermuda problem in there right now. So we're trying to kind of do selective tillage and cover cropping and move ourselves that direction. Come up this way, I'll show you the kind of the most exciting thing we've learned in the last couple of years. And that is leaf use. We've started mulching in the fall with leaves, and then in the spring, rather than do any sort of tillage or any sort of amending really, we're just pulling the leaves off and just raking them off, and they go in the path. And they compact pretty well, leaves do that. And we seed or transplant into the bed as is. And by far the prettiest soil we had last year was the soil that was underneath those leaves in the spring. Which is not terribly surprising when you think about, like, if a pile of leaves sits somewhere over the winter and you pull it off, it's always beautiful soil under there. Because you're giving it a blanket. So the biology has stayed active all winter long. It's kind of kept it moist. It has not been compacted because the leaves kind of fluff over the top and protect it from rain and snow and ice and all this sort of thing. It's pretty cool. So that's what's going on here. And it's a little bit light. We were kind of playing with our spreader as we did this. So it actually get a little bit heavier than that. But when it first went on, it was about 10 inches deep or so. And we'll go ahead and do that all the way across this field. And so I like that because I like that better than cover cropping, because cover cropping has that termination problem, you know? I mean, if you use rye, which is my favorite cover crop because of the way it grows, you get really nice growth all through the winter, and you got to kill it somehow, and that's a hassle. It's really hard to kill. I mean, until it isn't. So it's hard to kill until about the end of May, middle of May.
Leaves in the spring.
I just rake them off. And it seems like I thought I'd have to take them off the whole bed, off the whole field, but I don't. Our paths are about 18 to 24 inches, and our bed's about 30 to 36. And we just raked it off the bed, and by the time you'd raked it off the bed, well, at the time it sat there all winter, and then you rake it off, and you walk down the path, it's really okay in the path. And then by this fall, you really couldn't tell that we'd done it. There were no leaves left in the path.
Yeah, they.
Cool. Yeah, you just gotta go in. But there were lots of worms, more worms than I've seen under anything before. I mean, to the degree, like when we were raking the beds, you would, even after we'd raked the beds and grown one plant cycle, when you would rake that bed later, you would pop earthworms out of the ground. I've never seen anything like it. Like we'd be raking earthworm on the surface. So they really like it, and that's always a good sign to me when the earthworms are happy. We're doing something right. So, but anyway, that's my answer to the cover cropping question. And the other answer is, of course, that we run a lot of double and triple cropping, and so it's hard to find space to cover crop. The other thing you'll see, not out here but out in the tomato field, is we go in September and we broadcast rye underneath all the solanaceous crops. And so all the peppers, tomatoes have a nice, understory of rye this time of year, where there's all these dead stalks and vines that went till frost, but now we've got this nice carpet underneath it that's soaking up all those nutrients. But I just have to be careful with that because I don't want to put it anywhere where I want to do early spring crops the next year. So tarps are good for that, early stuff, or the leaves are okay. The only downside of the leaves is, well, there's probably several downsides, but the biggest one is that it keeps the soil cool. So you rake it off, the bark, it's pretty cold in it. It hasn't had any sun, hasn't had any warmth really added to it yet. So it takes a week or two for the soil to really warm up. But I bet that plays different ways depending on the year somewhat too, because it also doesn't get as cold and it's never going to have frozen ground and a pile of leaves. So I don't know how that works out the balance, but I do like the leaves a lot. And then the other thing we'll do some of is well, I do a lot of is composting. We'll see that out in the campus. This time of year, the biggest one for us is, are we burned out or are we just tired? And it's a subtle, but I think most of us could tell you the difference. You've been there, you've been burned out where you're like, I'm done, I'm out, this is all I'm ever doing. Tired is to be expected. I think, a growing season is a marathon. It's a long, hard course, but at the end of it, you feel like, okay, we accomplished that, we did what we set out to do. We had highs and lows, but we'll crawl under our rock and enjoy our book in front of the fire this winter, and then we'll be ready to go again in January, February. Burned out is something different, right? Burned out is, I can't do this again. I don't want to do this again. I don't ever want to do this. I don't ever want to see another seed, And this is the time of year to ask yourself that question, because by human nature, there's a decent chance that by January, February, you'll have forgotten the pain, and you'll just remember all the beautiful sunrises. And if you don't take advantage of that moment of clarity at the end of the season, then you may just keep repeating that same insane cycle again and again, even though it is burnout and not just tiredness. So if you're burned out, then it's time to change, right? Time to find a different way to do the thing. Let's see. Let me go in there. Hey. Campfire. Nice. Oh, good. See that piggy temperature?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, looking good, huh? So, you know, the bigger answer to the fertility question is I import a ton of organic matter. And a lot of it's brought to me for free, like the wood chips. Some of it we haul in, like about half of those leaves we've hauled here. The other half have been brought here by people wanting to get rid of them. The pumpkins are things we brought in from Dan Bigby's farm, Fast Night Creek. You know, we're buying a lot of pig food, and that turns into organic matter on the farm, of course. So there's a lot of that sort of thing happening. And that's kind of, the compost addition in particular is part of how we sidestep the need to cover crop. Because we're just adding so much organic matter to the soil on such a regular basis. And it does many of the same things. It's not all the same things because there's nothing that quite substitutes for an actively growing plant on the surface of the soil. But it's pretty useful. And you can tell. I mean, you know, you look in our beds. It looks like we're growing in, like, I don't know, upstate Michigan or something. It's like potting soil that we're growing in these days, rather than Ozarks soil, which is a very different thing. So my problems have now become like, I have to water frequently enough to keep the compost moist, rather than watering frequently enough so that the soil doesn't crust. So it's interesting because they kind of are both the same thing, but yet I'd rather deal with the compost problem, because then once they do grow, I'm going to have big, long, beautiful carrots instead of, you know, in the crusty clay soil, I was going to have little pinky, crooked, weird things. But that's what these guys are doing, and that is my mountain of leaves. I'm very excited about that. We really did an all-out effort to get as many leaves as possible this year, and it's working. And so those are waiting to go out. That's next week's project, is lots and lots of leaves out on the fields. Meanwhile, you can see behind us, we've still got beets coming out of the ground. Normally, by this time of year, we would have yanked all the beets and put them in the cooler, but, you know, the 10-day forecast has not indicated that would be wise yet. The beets are still growing, and the tops are a little damaged, so they're not like, we're not sowing them with tops on anymore, they're kind of ugly, but the roots are definitely still bulking up. And, of course, sweetening, and this is perfect storage. I mean, you can't, they're much better in the ground at this point than they would be in our cooler. So, that said, normally this time of year we would be yanking them all, plus the carrots, and get them in the cooler, partly because it's, you know, they're not going to grow anymore normally, and also partly because it's so much more convenient for us to go, oh, we got 600 pounds of beets in the cooler, we're going to pull out 100 pounds of that this week and sell them, rather than, we should harvest some beets and figure out what's out there, and oh, dang, it's 25 degrees and there's snow on the ground, and that's not good beet harvest weather, or even just wet and 40, you know, it's not nice to be harvested. So it's nice to be able to kind of have a backlog. So we've got several things on our list right now that are what we call strip harvest, where we'll go out and we'll just clear all the beds, take everything, put it in the cooler. And the beets are on that list, but we're not in any kind of rush right now. We've got some daikon radish, so in the same category as some stuff that we're ready to harvest, but we just haven't. There's no pressing need right now. Let's see, anything else out here? We'll go take a peek in efforts. Yeah, on those spots where you're putting the leaves, when you add compost, is that after before I put the leaves up? I like to put compost on and then leaves. Compost on and rake and do, you know, level everything out, and then do the leaves on top of that. Which you could do it later, but to me the purpose of the leaves is to give you a blanket over the field for the winter. And so if I do that and then I put the compost on top of that, then it's, you know, kind of counterproductive stuff. All right, we'll walk down this aisle here. You know, it was, I had some help doing it last year, and it was such a crappy job to redo it this year. I'm just kidding.
Turnip throwers.
You guys were great. Yeah, Springfield Community Gardens came out and helped me. This was last fall, wasn't it? Yeah, a year ago.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm really happy with this. And this is interesting because this was very late started. We were feeling really behind the ball. And, this fall just has been crazy. So I'm very, very happy to have the abundance we have in here. These, by the way, I think are a real long shot. But the more 60-degree days that we get, the more I think we might actually have carrots out of these beds, which would be lovely. I mean, that's almost a carrot. It's 6 more weeks of this kind of weather from a carrot, which is pretty optimistic, but who knows? And they will overwinter in here, and we've had them size up after this. The challenge is if they get too big this time of year, and then they get a real cold snap like in January, then when they start back up, they can be really weird and hairy and multi-topped, and it can be kind of strange. So I don't like that, but we're ready to cover them aggressively if we need to. The scallions are all paper potted. I am in love with paper potting scallions. It's definitely my favorite paper potted crop. But the salad, the head lettuce, and the choy are both paper potted as well, and the spinach behind you as well. So, yeah, we're kind of fans of the paper pot. The downside of the paper pot is all this paper you see. These little white, this line. That's it. Takes about a year for them to fully decompose. So, kind of unsightly and obnoxious between now and then. So this is and we talk about planning, this is an interesting aspect of this, right? Is we don't plan as specifically as some farms do about where everything's going. Now the high tunnels are somewhat of an exception, so we'll say, okay, these beds are going to be slicer tomatoes, these beds are going to be cherry tomatoes within this space. But then in the fall, we don't. We kind of have an idea that this is how many beds, like we want to have 4 beds of spinach under cover for the overwinter. We want to have a bed of chard, we want to have a couple of beds of lettuce going into the fall. But where those end up is flexible based on what's coming out. And the reason, and this is kind of like that whole idea we're talking about, where it's nice to have a map, but part of the reason you have a map is so you know where you can go exploring and not fall off the planet, By the way, just for the record, I don't think there's any chance of falling off the planet. Because that's a thing.
You have to say that.
So, the tomatoes in here are trellis, big tall trellis tomatoes all summer long, and started in March. And as they get sick and disease or pest or whatever, then we take them out. And so some years that may be, a couple of beds in Everest, and other years it may be a couple beds in one of the other high tunnels and whatever. I'm going to adjust my cropping plan accordingly, right? So the chard wanted to go in first because, chard takes a while to mature, and you can see it really paid off to get that in the ground first. We've had several harvests off of it. It's gorgeous this year. The only reason it's in that bed versus this bed or that bed or another bed, another tunnel, was this was the first one that we removed for disease, because we said, well, this is, this tomato crop here it's about 3/4 diseased plants. Let's just yank them all. We're not making enough off of it to make it make sense anymore, so let's yank it off and get the chard in and then parsley. Because as we pointed out before, parsley is, it turns out, a green gold mine. Not even kidding. It's crazy. I think we've harvested already 100 bundles of parsley off of that bed, and at so $225 worth of parsley off that little chunk of bed, and we'll do that 3 or 4 more times this winter. I wish I could sell a whole tunnel worth of parsley. I'd probably just do that. Yeah, it's crazy. But anyway, so that's why we did that. And then these beds over on the far side were cherry tomatoes until the frost took them out. And they were still cranking out enough cherry tomatoes that it made sense to leave them in that until they were actually terminated by cold weather. Had I known it was going to be like this in December, I might have kept them, because by golly, we could still be picking cherry tomatoes. But probably not really. What we found is late winter or late fall, the sunlight starts to really impact how that works too. So there's a limit. But that's seeded now for spring spinach. So it should start popping up No, that's it's not spinach popping up, is it? But it should start popping up probably next week or the week after. It's been in the ground for 2 weeks, I think it is. So we'll have that'll be strong spinach all through. Probably start harvesting around the end of January, beginning of February, and then we'll pick off of it 5 or 6 times before it starts to bolt. And part of the reason we do that is because this stuff here that's been transplanted out, we've been picking since October, is going to bolt right around. It'll start bolting usually the first or second week of January, pretty early after that. And that's kind of a daylight thing. So if you go through the coldest part of the winter and the darkest part of the winter, then it tends to bolt. And if it's just popping up, so this stuff hopefully will come up right around the winter solstice, and then it'll view this as the first year that it's alive, and the spinach that's coming up, that's been up, it's going to view January as the second year it's been alive. It's time to make seeds. So that's the way we're thinking. We're thinking to plants. That's probably not fair, but however they know that, they know it. So. Any questions about anything you see in here?
What type of tomato did you have here, and what disease did it have?
That was I think those were Big Dinas, and they had that bacterial stem canker, or bacterial stem rot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there was a brown rot inside the stems that ran the full length of the stems.
Did you have any timber rot in here last year? I know we talked about
No.
bacterial canker, but
I haven't had any significant timber rot since we started steaming. Steaming knocked out my timber rot. So the timber rot, it's the same disease vector, same organism as sclerotinia. What is sclerotinia? It would be called lettuce wilt, lettuce drop.
Lettuce drop,
Is that what lettuce drop? Yeah. It's same thing, and then it's it affects. It's a generalist. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a generalist, which was part of our motivation for getting the steamer. Was actually the biggest part of it was because we were losing that and tomatoes and lettuce and tomatoes and choy and salad mix and all those things were getting hit.
all in like your best tunnel.
Yeah, and and we even these are mobile, so we're rotating, but still it was generalist enough that it was sticking around, and also those sclerotia are incredibly durable, so they can be in the ground. I mean, when you read up on it, you go, oh my goodness, it's like a 7-year rotation to get away from sclerotinia. There's nowhere on my farm that I'm not going to grow the same thing in 7 years,
Right.
And if it's a generalist, then I don't really even have anything to rotate to. So,
And how
so
do
that's
you
what
kill
motivates us.
that, Curtis? You
We
mentioned
steam.
Steam. Okay.
Yeah. Now, and that's what we walked by the machine, but I didn't point it out. But it's a big black kind of locomotive-looking thing
Okay.
parked out in front of the high tunnel over there, and it generates. It's just a steam generator. It's a boiler, and it pushes steam out into a sock. There's a tarp over the bed, and so it, kind of the steam covers the bed, and then it heats it up. So we're aiming to get about 160 degrees, 170 degrees to the 2-inch deep level. And that kills our sclerotinia, a whole host of other soil-borne diseases, and it also kills our chickweed.
So you expose just the soil to that.
Just the soil.
Right. I was going to say 160 degrees, you'd knock your plants out.
Yes, you would.
Okay.
Yeah. It's absolutely something to do between. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And you can see that's why these carrots are so clean. We haven't done any cultivation in these carrots. You can see the paths didn't quite get steamed as well. The scallions look really nice in general. So that's what the steam will do as well. But the weeds are a secondary benefit. The biggest benefit to us was the disease control, because we were starting to have some really serious sclerotinia problems.
I imagine you have quite a bit of collateral damage with that too. Do you recommend any sort of biological inoculation after
So
the fact?
it's a great question. So obviously if you're sterilizing, which is not really what's happening, but you're definitely knocking the life out of the top.
Sure.
It's a couple inches of soil. So a lady named I think it's Becky Madsen is her name. I think that's right. But she's out in New Hampshire. She's a farmer and a researcher, and she actually did this. She had a grant this year and last 2 years, I guess, to test that. What's the actual impact? And what she's finding is that within about 3 months, your soil life is back to normal. But the things like sclerotinia, which are host dependent, are not necessarily. So, and I don't really know. She just sent us that link yesterday. we had the conversation about a year ago because her initial results were that she was seeing the life come back. And so there's a there's a group of us farmers who are doing steaming in the U.S., which is interesting to step back for just a second and say it's not a new technology. In fact, most of us are using steamers that were used in tobacco back in the 70s. That's where the steaming technology was first used. High value crop, very disease prone, and tending to use the same spaces again and again. And most of them were using that in their greenhouses, their propagation greenhouses, to clean up the greenhouses. Then the technology went to Canada, and so they started that in the early 70s, mid 70s. And in Canada, they are still steaming in greenhouses, but what they're doing now is permanent boilers and big steam pipes that run through the whole greenhouse they use for heat, and then they can also tap into them to do steaming in the beds. And they're doing it for the same reason: high value crop, limited option to rotate, and and it's a non-chemical method. I mean, there's in the States, what's happened is the steaming went away as the bromides, I think it is, came in. Maybe not bromides, I might be the right thing, but whatever they are, there's horrible chemicals that are used to chemically fumigate. Like the sort of chemicals where they're like apply and then leave the area for 2 days. That's spooky stuff. Like you can't even just be around it, like because what's doing, it's off gassing, I think, bromide gas, and it kills everything in the soil. So all that to say, the technology kind of left the States, and now it's coming back gradually through small growers like us, who are going, well, this is a really interesting technology because it does what we need it to do without the use of a lot of really toxic chemicals. Now, high petroleum use, because it's a diesel powered boiler, and so we're using a good bit of diesel fuel. I think it comes out to about 5 gallons of diesel fuel per bed. That's a lot of diesel, a lot of petrochemicals. We're thinking we're able to do what we're seeing so far is we can do it about every 2 years and have a really good end result. How does that pencil out over time? I have to ask. Well, if this becomes our regular weather, then maybe it's not a good idea. I don't know. It's complicated, but I do know that it has solved one of our problems, which is great. Actually, solved 2 problems in one whack, which was chickweed and sclerotinia.
I have one more question about
that.
that.
Go ahead.
Drew and I were talking to Jason from Box Turtle yesterday, actually, kind of not about steaming in general, but just about getting rid of disease in your soil. And he has been using like copious amounts of grass clippings.
Yeah, he's doing that. He's also
fumigation.
He's got quite.
He's got words.
Yeah. But yeah, he takes about 6 inches of grass clippings. He tills them in. He cuts them, spreads them on his beds, tills them in, and then spreads clear plastic across the whole shebang. Well, waters it, saturates it with water, and then covers it over.
And he said it's a different film than just like the regular 6 mil poly we use.
Yeah.
It's like completely non-porous.
Yes, but then he has also found that the greenhouse plastic works okay. So he bought the other one, and then he decided he was okay using it.
Have you done that for this purpose? Instead of
I've
steaming
not.
before?
So what I did along those lines, we tried some solarization, which is kind of the standard organic answer to that. And it works okay as long as your weather is right. That's the hard part. And he'll tell you that about the grass thing too. Like it doesn't work perfectly all year round. It works better when it's warm. But yeah, I think it's really promising, and it's certainly better than using a bunch of diesel to steam your beds. But yeah. Anyway, I never quite said the last thing I was going to say too, which was. So there's a group of growers doing this now, and we're starting to share information and have an email. Well, there's an email group, and then we're occasionally a Zoom meeting, and I think that's pretty exciting because to me that means we should accelerate the pace of learning quite a bit. There's about 10 of us that are on that list, which also tells you just how beginning the technology is for this particular use. There's not a lot of people doing it because it's fairly new, new to this particular application of it. Old technology being used in a new way. But yeah, I think biodisinfestation or something like that. He also anaerobic biodisinfestation, I think is what Jason's calling his. And he had some really promising results last year. And then a couple times this year he had mixed results. And he hasn't figured out what changed. So typically he's had almost 0 weeds. He has really high organic matter. He's got no disease. using this method. But somehow this year he had a couple of times it didn't work, and he hasn't figured out why yet. So, which is true with steam too. I mean, you can see here, like on one hand, I've got some beautiful weed control and disease control, but then I've got a couple places where it clearly didn't work. And I wish I could tell you exactly why that's happening. Like I know, for example, that when we did this tart with the steaming a couple of weeks ago, we had a place that just never would inflate and never got as hot as the rest. In the middle of the bed, you would think at the end maybe, but this, it's like a big inflatable balloon, more or less, with a sock running through it that leaks steam at both ends. Well, it's supposed to leak steam the whole length, and yet somehow in the middle it wouldn't inflate, and it never really got full width. So I'm expecting they'll have some nasty weed problems right there in the middle of the tunnel. I don't know why. It's weird. So, yeah, still learning. Did that answer?
Yeah, very much so. Thank you.
But and I've put this out there. Anybody who wants to play with steam, I've got the steamer, and I'm glad to learn it out. So it's not as scary as it sounds. That's not true. It's pretty scary. It's pretty scary. But it's low pressure, so you just keep all the valves open. You just don't let it pressure up. It's like 10 or 11 psi, which isn't very much. But when you've got a boiler this big around and 6 feet long, that's at that temperature, that pressure, you actually are. It's if it blew up, it would be catastrophic for anybody standing within like 50 feet of it, I think, or very damaging. So I just get it going and then walk away. Tell everybody else to do the same. So, all right, well, let's go out the back here and I'll show you kale beds, future kale beds, and then we're gonna keep grounding the farm here. Carson, you were asking about fertility and cover cropping and all that. So here's what we're doing here. We spread coffee grounds because we have an incredible amount of coffee grounds, like something in the realm of 600, more than that. We'll just say conservatively 600 gallons of coffee grounds that come to us a year from neighborhood mill, and we've been playing around with how to use that. So what we're currently doing, and seems to be working pretty well, is we lay down coffee grounds first, and then we dump compost over the top of that, and then so this needs to be raked, and we'll smooth out the beds a little bit, and then we will, depending on whether we have time or not, we'll spread some wood chips in the paths, and then we'll tarp the whole thing until spring, and then in the spring we'll come through here and we'll just roll back our tarp a couple beds at a time and transplant into it as we need it. And the nice thing about that is we sidestep all that hassle of spring tillage when you just don't have any idea what the weather's going to be like. Even spring no-till, it's just hard to get into and work a muddy, mucky bed. So if we can we do this instead, we kind of sidestep some of that, and we get some of our work done in a time when the pace or the weather allows for it. March can be a pretty stressful month. There's a lot to do, a lot of between the transplanting and if you're trying to add bed prep to that. So having the beds prepped, tarped, and just waiting for us is really a nice thing. So we've been chipping away at this for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and finally got the last of the compost spread just a couple days ago, and now I need to go through and rake off the tops. Sometimes I do that. I've got a rototiller on my tractor that I can actually, if I just set it real shallow, I can run through and do that, and it just kind of levels off the top without really getting into it. But because I've got a lot of weeds popping up in these beds, I don't really want to do that. I'm going to go ahead and use a hand rake to do it. It won't take very long. And I do, the other reason I like to apply compost in the fall is compost really mellows with that freeze-thaw cycle. This time of year, we handle it, it can be a little wet. It can be kind of clumpy. But as soon as it starts freezing and thawing, that all goes away. It's just very friable product. So,
Do you have
so
a
that's what's going
recommendation on type for small farms, small backyard gardeners? Preference on type of compost, brand, or there's mushroom.
The city
in there.
compost is pretty great, honestly.
The city from
city
the
of Springfield
recycle?
compost.
Okay.
You guys still use a lot of that?
Yeah, I mean it's not really biologically active because it gets so hot, but if you're putting it
Sure.
in what you're doing, it becomes inoculated pretty quickly.
Pretty quickly, and it's a great matrix. I mean, it's just this really nice texture, easy to work with, and yeah, that's what I did for years before I made my own. And I still buy. I guess this year I bought 4 dump truck loads of it just for top dressing. I like to apply it like just if I'm going to direct seed into a bed, like you asked about when we rake the leaves off. That's the one thing we'll sometimes add in the spring. Is we rake the leaves off and then we can just sprinkle a little compost on. I mean, sprinkle. It's
Okay.
half inch or so, and then direct seed into that.
If we do use the compost in the spring, which I know you said you like to put it in the fall, but then you need to worry about diluting it, so to speak, or mixing it
Well, I
somehow
haven't
so
seen
you
it
don't
with
burn
citrus. Have
anything.
you ever had anything burn?
No, and in fact, I know. I mean, like Alyssa will just plant straight compost.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
she's got this beautiful celery growing in like this
Yep.
much compost in her
Yep.
raised beds,
Yep.
just straight up, and it's
It's
happy.
really mellow stuff.
Okay.
Now
Okay.
it does depend a little on the year. I have had. There was a year, a couple years back, when I think they were. They got behind because they were paving their site, and that year when I got the delivery, it was really hot, and I was more careful with it that year. I mean, anytime you get a load of compost and it's like too hot to stick your hand in, you want to be careful. It was hot, but what I love to do if I can, and this is what I usually do this time of year, is get a dump truck load and let it sit over the winter. Because then it's just, you can tell the difference. I mean, from when it gets delivered to when it's you use it a couple months later, it humifies, and it's just the texture changes, the smell and the feel. It's just a much nicer thing.
Just don't set it on top of Bermuda.
No, don't put it on top. It'll just Bermuda goes, ooh, I'll grow all winter long. Yes, I've done that. I also set it on top. What was the other thing I did?
People, they don't like that.
Johnson grass, I think, it's kind of responds similarly. Some trophy Johnson grass roots out. Anyway, so that's the pattern out here, and so we'll do this with several other beds. Now this is a 1, 2, 3, 4 plot rotation. So this summer or this spring, these will be onions. I've got my overwinter onions already out. There'll be some onions that go in the spring. This will be kale. This will be cut. It's kind of a mixed plot, but it's got a lot of cut flowers in it. And then the tunnel will move down to the last plot, and that'll be the tomatoes and a little bit of cut flowers beside it as well. And then this is actually going to get a little bit complicated. We haven't quite figured out what we're going to do. I guess we're just going to bring our tunnel back. We thought about, like, do we bring it all the way back to the beginning? That seems excessive. It seems like a lot of tunnel moving. So we'll probably just bring it back one. But the point is that there's this rotation going on out here. So there's 4 things that grow, and the one that gets compost addition is the kale. So we get compost added right before the spring kale, and we've started doing that because when we did other things, it seemed to cause us problems. We didn't like the results when we added our compost directly before the carrots. That didn't work at all because the carrots get weird. The beets were okay with it, but it didn't seem to benefit them that much. The kale loves it. Kale goes crazy, especially if it's overwintered. If the compost overwinters, it really likes that. So.
You say you had your onions out already?
Yeah, see the green. What would you want down? They just can't figure out what to call this field bamboo field. No, I just got it. It's my predecessor. I kind of like it. It's pretty. Well, it's not that pretty this year because it died down to the ground last year. With a vengeance. We've tried using these stakes a little bit.
Go underground to your bed, or
A little bit, but not too bad. I find if I brush hog it a little back in May, it usually controls it pretty well. Yeah, so this is the overwintering onions. So I've actually got a few more to put out.
you put them out as sets,
Mm-hmm.
and then they just stand there all winter, and then next spring they make the
Big
sweet-
bulb.
make the bulb.
Big bulb sweet onions, yeah. Which is a fairly new thing. We used to do we'd get Dixondale's plants in the spring. For years, that's what we did. And then a couple of years back, we came across these bulbed overwintered onions. And it's a lot easier. So much easier. And it comes up pretty good. Yeah, it's a heavy seeding rate. It's much heavier than what you would do if you were like bare soil or something.
And then you what in the spring with that?
So in the spring, this is going to be sweet potatoes next year. So I'll be able to let it go until the middle of May. And at the middle of May, it'll be in milk stage. Grain will be easy. And I'll roll it. Usually what that really means practically is I just take my tractor through with the bucket down and just kind of knock it down. And that kills it. It breaks the stem and kills it.
Huh. Okay.
It won't work before that. Until it's in milk stage, it won't.
Okay. Stems are limber.
Yeah, and it'll keep growing. But at that point, it's put so much energy into the grain that if you knock it down, it kills it.
Right.
And then we'll just stick our sweet potato slips in there and
Sweet.
let it go. Right? Yeah. So of course we got to clean the tomato plants off between now and then. That's okay. That's January work. You know?
What was the other cover crop you talked about?
Daikon radishes. And then we also did
What are those?
well, there's a big
Smell it. Radish.
Mm-hmm.
and they do a really nice job of penetrating the soil and opening it up. So
Good looking collards.
holes this big around and put deep in the soil. I really like that. So this is a good example of what's become of our farm. 3/4 cut flowers, 1/4 food. So these are anemones over here, and then down there by Anna is Lysianthus. And over here, let's see, those are Campanula here, I think, and I don't remember what's down there. Oh, snapdragons, yeah. And then behind you, Drew, I can't. Those might be ranunculus. Is that what it says? Butterfly, ranunculus.
Butterfly, yep.
Yeah. And then I just lost the name on these, but more snapdragons down here. But the point is, this is kind of so the kale's really the only thing that we're getting anything off of right now. All the rest of it's planted for spring blooms. But these will be popping up in. I mean, they'll be starting to bloom sometime toward the end of February, beginning of March, ideally, and then they'll crank out flowers until usually the end of May or so.
Flowers.
Cut flowers. So yeah.
Is there a lot of thought behind like what is paired together under these structures, or is it really just whatever you have room for?
Yeah, no, it is.
At what time?
And there's that's a great question. So, so Anna's question was about how do we think about what's going to go together, and that's across the whole farm. So one thing we're thinking about is when are these crops going to finish up? So ideally we would be flipping a good portion of a house at a time rather than like one bed at a time over a long period. Also, we need crops that have similar needs. So are they going to need a lot of water or a little water? Are they going to need high temperatures, low temperatures? So all these are crops that are going to thrive in a fairly vented and cool space. Versus, let's see, for example, well, the figs are a good example. In the spring, we want to close up the fig house and let it get really hot. And if we have kale in there, it's not going to be happy about that. It's just too much. Where we were talking about, one of the things that we toyed with putting into the fig house is beets. Because beets don't mind the heat too much. I mean, too much heat will mess them up, but they don't mind to be 80 degrees. Whereas kale at 80 degrees is kind of unhappy. So that's kind of part of it. So what are the needs, water and temperature wise? What is the timing of this crop going in and coming back out? And then it gets into just what do we have available, what's ready to go out to the field, and that sort of stuff plays into it as well. But all these flowers will have similar time frames, which is also nice even from a harvest perspective, that you can walk in here and you can, somebody can spend an hour and a half in here harvesting flowers and be productive the whole time, and they don't have to move to another site and do something, different field or whatever. So it's nice to group things that way as well. But a lot of it, ultimately, of course, it does come down to what's ready and when's it ready, and then we got to make sure it gets in the ground in a timely manner. So, good question. So are we selling every seed we buy? And the idea of that is just where are you seeing waste in your system, and that's something that we take notes about. This year, for example, 2 failed seedings of carrots. That's something we're going to pay attention to and say, how do we solve this problem? And part of it was, I think I mentioned this, but part of it the sprinkler got shut down. But the other part of it was, we usually put row cover on top of our fall carrot seedings, and we didn't, because we thought, we got this fancy schmancy irrigation system. We don't need to do that. Not true. So we'll go back to that. Other examples of that sort of thing would be, over the years, we've always had an extra margin on seedling production, right? So if we're going to grow tomatoes, if we want 100 tomato plants in the ground, we're going to grow more than that so that we have 100 when it comes time to transplant them out, because it's better to have a few that don't make it than to. But one of the things we've done over the years is we've been able to reduce that margin a little bit. As we've gotten better at seedling production, we used to have a 50% margin on everything, so we'd grow 150 plants. We now have like a 20% margin. And even on some plants, nothing's less than that, but and we'll play with that too, based on how hard is it to get the plant if our seeding fails. So, for example, slicer tomatoes are not hard to come by. I can go to the auction if I need to and buy a whole bunch of slicer tomato plants, or I've got a bunch of friends who grow them, or whatever. That's not a problem. If I want to have sun gold tomatoes, I need to make sure that I grow plenty of sun gold tomato plants, because those are not something I can go buy anywhere else. They just don't. Nobody else is really growing those, or very few. And so we have adjusted our numbers over the years that way to accommodate, or to accommodate's the wrong word, but to take that into account, that some things are harder to get than others. Okay, so are we selling every seed? This is about, like I said, about marketing and following up with the plan. And the marketing thing is the stuff we talked about. We can tweak our marketing plan to say, okay, let's turn the dial up a little bit over here and see what happens next year. Let's turn this one down a little bit, see what happens. What sorts of opportunities are there for us to consider is another question. And this is kind of the big one, like, where do we want to be in a year, or 2 years, or 3 years, 5 years, and how are we steering the ship so we get there? And a simple example of that is over the years we've just added more and more covered space. And now I think we're done with that. We're saying, okay, this is probably all the covered space we want. So now what we're doing as we plan is not looking for more covered space, but it is going for more secure covered space. So those caterpillar tunnels we were just looking at, we bought a 30 by 96 tunnel, Morgan County structure this fall, and that we had to take down, but we're going to put it back up on skids, and we're going to replace one of our caterpillar tunnels with that. And that's just a little more stable structure. I won't say that we'll never use the caterpillar tunnel again, but it'll be nice to be in something that's just built to be a little more permanent than those temporaries. I love the cost of those structures. I love the simplicity of them, but they definitely are more prone to blowing away. They are more prone to having other structural issues. They don't vent as easily as a tunnel that has drop down or roll up sides. There's just a lot of things about them that are not quite as nice as. And so as we've been able to, we've kind of moved things that way as sort of more established way of doing business, I guess. But those are opportunities, and then other opportunities would be conversations with chefs. Sometimes we'll go and have a conversation with a chef and say, what did you like about what we gave you this year? What could be better? Is there anything that you'd like us to grow? And so growing radicchio came out of that. A conversation with a chef several years back, and he said, I buy several cases of radicchio a week. I'd love to buy radicchio from you guys. And so we started raising some radicchio. Interestingly, he kind of stopped buying after a while. He shifted his menu and didn't do as much of that. But we really like growing radicchio, and we found a market for it. So it still works, And I guess you could say, sort of the opposite of that, which is like and then I guess that's kind of what the selling every seed we purchase. But it's that question of and then what are we needing to set aside? And so for us, a few years back, that was melons. We tried to grow melons many times, and just never had a lot of success with them. Took a lot of time and energy trying to grow them. Finally went, this isn't working. We need to set this aside for now, and then maybe eventually we'll come back to it when we kind of have a lot of other things nailed down, which we've done with, for example, sweet potatoes. We set those aside after having a lot of rodent problems and deer problems for several years. We stopped growing sweet potatoes for a couple of years, and then about 3 years ago we started doing them again. Kind of felt like we had some of those things figured out. And this year we harvested some absurd amount of sweet potatoes. I don't even know, 3,000 pounds, maybe 4,000. It was a lot.
4 potatoes.
Right.
It was, yeah, that was just the first 4 potatoes. They were massive. Yeah, so many potatoes, and they were gorgeous, and we don't really see any reason to slow down on that at this point. But part of the reason we're being successful now is because we were willing to step away from it for a little while and talk with other growers, find some solutions, focus on the things that were working. One of the things I see farmers do sometimes is and we've been guilty of this, is like point ourselves at something and then not pay enough attention to whether it's working or not. And just, by golly, this is what we're going to do, this is who we are, we got to make this thing happen. Well, that's a formula for disaster, right? I mean, when you get so attached to the idea of something that you can't adjust, then yeah, that's kamikaze thinking there. So anyway, that's a big deal. And then, like I said, at the end of it, once our seedling plan is done, then that's what drives everything else. So I don't have time in March or April to be thinking about how many radishes do I want to plant this week. That's not a question I need to answer at that point. I just need to look at the seedling plan and go, this week I'm planting 1 full bed of radishes, because back in December, when I had time to sit there with a cup of tea and good minds relaxed sitting around a table, really engaged with the process, then we came up with this good solution. And barring some sort of crazy deviation from what I thought was going to be happening, I should stick with my plan generally. And that's really important to me, is that we create a plan now that leads us through the season without, and like we said, there's always variations, there's always deviations. You try this, try that, and you may modify it as you go through the season. But in general, we know that when the time comes, we're going to have all the tomato plants we need to fill our tunnels. And when the time comes, we're going to have several hundred lettuce plants to set out every 2 weeks, so that we keep that steady supply of lettuce. And the reason we have that is because we have this plan that we're making now and then following through the season. All right, so I hope this has been helpful. We've talked about some big questions you need to ask yourself as you think about your coming season. We've talked about how to collect usable data without committing yourself to too much data collection. And we've really focused in on how do you set yourself up for a successful season. So I hope this has been helpful. This is Curtis Millsap from Millsap Farm and Springfield Community Gardens. Thanks for joining us. Hit the subscribe button if this is something you'd like to see more of.